for the Meltano project at GitLab. My name is Douwe, and I have been leading the project for the last couple months, and I'm excited to give you a little bit of an update on what's been going on. The update I gave is actually in the form of a slide deck, so if you haven't checked it out yet, please do so now. And if you have any questions, put them up on the document. The first question is from Francis. Would you like to verbalize it?
Sure, yeah, right before this started, we were just chatting about how few people sometimes show up, and I'm just wondering what ideas you have for how to raise the visibility of Meltano within GitLab, and there are ways that those of us who are showing up can help.
Yeah, so great question. Indeed, I pointed out that this group conversation has a habit of not having perhaps as many questions on it as other group conversations within GitLab, which makes a lot of sense because it's a project that is very much removed from a lot of the day-to-day GitLab reality for most people, because it's not even a product we currently use ourselves, and it's very much disconnected from the GitLab tool we are building and selling, etc. But in terms of raising the visibility within GitLab, I want to make it clear that from my perspective, raising the visibility of Meltano inside GitLab is not currently a priority that I'm actually allocating time and resources to. Although, of course, I would appreciate it if more people came in and asked questions and gave suggestions. But right now, the people we are targeting are also not inside GitLab because they are data engineers, especially data engineers that are already have experience with open source data pipelines built around Singer, extractors, and loaders. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's exactly why you're probably not the target audience right now. But if you are excited about this or interested in this like other open source project that GitLab is working on, that might benefit from your contributions, or at least from your perhaps spreading it within your own network where there might be other people who might find more use in it, then please feel free. As far as what I can do or we can all do to raise the visibility of Meltano within GitLab, right now the data team is not actually using Meltano for any of its data pipelines, and I wouldn't say that that's something that needs to change right away because it is still very much kind of a beta product in the sense that if you look at the slides, you'll see that some of the things we're working on over the next week have a lot to do with more reliable production-ready data pipelines, for example. And we have a really great community now of early adopters who are aware of those limitations and who are giving us all the feedback we need, but it's not quite at the place yet where a company like GitLab that really wants to, of course, be able to rely on its data pipelines would be able to switch right over to it. But I am hoping to kind of continue the conversation with the GitLab data team over the next couple of weeks or months to start figuring out whether we can give Meltano a place in GitLab's own data stack, not necessarily immediately as a replacement for our current production-ready pipelines, but as something that might be able to run side by side for a time so that we can kind of monitor the differences in performance and the differences in the actual data that gets imported at the end so that we will be able to detect when Meltano has come to a point where it can actually perform the task of our current pipelines just as well. And then, of course, by actually getting GitLabbers to use it, we immediately have a group of GitLabbers who are a little bit more invested in the Meltano project than they might be today. But otherwise, if you are, for whatever reason, just interested in contributing to an open source project where the barrier of entry and the barrier of contribution might be a little bit lower than it currently is in the main GitLab code base, Meltano would be a really great one to try out, especially if you already have some Python experience, or if you're curious to learn Python. And if you feel like it would be fun to kind of join this budding community of early adopter data engineers that are building this tool to allow you to basically get data from its various sources, all the different SaaS APIs you use, or a database that you might want to connect to, or even some CSV files on your hard drive, and then integrate them and transform them into a format that is more appropriate for analysis. And if you're not a data engineer, you might think that's not relevant to me, but there are a lot of use cases you can think of where even for kind of personal data stories, this kind of tool might be useful. I know that Emily Scario, for example, used it at some point to pull data out of her Goodreads account, where she keeps track of the books she's reading and the pace at which she is going through them, and she mapped it against her goal for the year. And Meltano is actually the kind of tool that can help you get this data out of these databases and SaaS APIs into a format that you can actually run some analytics on yourself. So what we can do to raise the visibility of Meltano within GitLab, I guess these group conversations do a decent job already because we still have some 20 odd people in the room today. All of you who are interested, check it out. Even if it's not something you currently need for your job, it might just be something that's fun as a side project. And know also that you'll be helping GitLab as well as the data engineering community at the same time, even if you're just giving us suggestions on how the documentation could be better, because unfortunately that is not something that I can spend a ton of time on right now, just because of course we are targeting those highly technical early adopter data engineers for whom high quality documentation at this point is a little bit less important than my actually addressing some of the issues they come across. But the idea is, of course, that over time, as the robustness of the base tool becomes more, as it becomes more robust, we will also be able to start spending some more time on making it more accessible again to less technical users who might not already be in the space. So that's a very long answer, slightly related to the question you asked, Francis. But during that time, another question has popped up on the list. Derek, would you like to verbalize it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was just curious what taps and targets that you know of that the community is working on currently. I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, good question. So the nice thing is that there exists a really big ecosystem of Singer taps and targets already. Singer taps and targets, for context, are extractors and loaders in your data pipeline. Extractors are responsible for pulling the data out of a data source, and then loaders are responsible for loading the data into a data warehouse or some kind of file format. So what people are currently doing mostly with Meltano as far as taps and targets are concerned is using the existing taps and targets in the ecosystem that people might currently be using with different Singer runners like PipelineWise, which is a pretty popular one that was built by TransferWise, or they might be using taps and targets that were built by consultancies at some point, either to be run on top of the Stitch platform, which is the hosted commercial offering of the same company that has written up the Singer specification. And there are just a lot of kind of data engineering consultancies out there that have built their own taps and targets over time. And a number of them are now evaluating using Meltano to run them instead of some other tool. So I haven't necessarily seen people pick up development on new taps and targets just because they came across Meltano. Right now, the story is very much about making Meltano the best and most production ready and most reliable and easy to deploy runner for Singer taps and targets in general, primarily focusing on getting all of those users that are already in the community today, but that are not aware of Meltano yet, getting them to the place where instead of whatever handcrafted Singer runners they're currently using, getting them to a place where they can use Meltano instead. And that's exactly what we have seen over the last couple months, is that some of these data engineers are trying out Meltano, giving us really great feedback. And that allows us to really, make Meltano kind of the go-to Singer runner for the entire community. And then once that has happened, then I anticipate us also, putting more resources on making it easier for people to actually build and test and maintain new taps and targets. But right now, if we can get the entire kind of backlog of existing taps and targets to work really well with Meltano, and we're slowly seeing people starting to try that out, that will be really great. And then by the time that Meltano has kind of become the de facto open source runner for taps and targets in general, then I would imagine that we would actually start seeing the ecosystem in general grow. While right now the job is mostly in getting the community kind of to Meltano, or at least getting them to give us enough feedback so that we can get to a place where a few months from now they would want to use Meltano. And the nice thing is that we've also been talking to people from some of the other Singer runners who have been giving us really great feedback as well, because a lot of the existing runners for these Singer taps and targets were built by data consultancies or data teams at various companies, very much out of the need. No Singer runner really existed yet that they could deploy in production, so they just wrote something themselves and then they open sourced it. But they don't necessarily want to be in the business of maintaining a Singer runner forever. So a lot of them have expressed that they would much rather kind of rally behind a dedicated open source Singer project with the actual intention of building a really great Singer runner, rather than their own Singer runner, which was just a byproduct of their not having been one in the past. And they would rather just focus on actually building the taps and the targets that they use and that they depend on with their business than on the Singer runner itself. And that is also something that, for example, PipelineWise, their lead developer mentioned, and PipelineWise is one of the more popular Singer runners today, but it has focused specifically on database to database pipelines rather than SaaS API to database or SaaS API to file format or what have you. And they also expressed that they are interested in seeing whether they can actually use the taps and targets they have built with Meltano instead of with their own tool, because in some future they are not interested in continuing to push for their own runner if a more robust and kind of community supported one steps up in the form of Meltano. Cool. Next question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, on that note then, so is there anything leverageable from those existing runners that exist out there? Like any particular set or just the idea or architecture or anything?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of actual code, obviously not so much because you cannot just rip it out and plug it in. But these are tools that have been written by people who themselves run these Singer pipelines in production and that have a lot of users who run Singer pipelines in production. So they are very much the end product or the result of years and years of fine tuning and iteration and then adding of features that the community requested. So one of the most valuable things people can do today is try to run their taps and targets with Meltano if they were previously running them with another tool, and then basically tell us in what ways Meltano is still lacking. And that has already raised a number of things that we didn't support at all or well in the past. For example, having to do with being able to modify the schema of the database, of the data that's extracted out of the data source, not just through transformations, but actually at extraction time. Because certain extractors, like the ones that connect with a database or kind of an arbitrary file format or even something like a Google spreadsheet, they try to figure out roughly what all the types are of the different columns that are being imported. Like, okay, this is a date column, this is a numeric column, this is a string column. But in some cases, those heuristics are not quite perfect, or you might have like commas and periods or whatever. So people have started requesting, okay, I want to be able to tell Meltano that this particular data source that is being imported was actually misrecognized by the tool, and I want to override some of these schema detections, which is a feature that we didn't have before. And of course, pipeline-wise and the like, they do have certain features like this because they have been run in production for years. And Meltano, of course, since we were running it ourselves over the last year for our own use cases, we didn't necessarily run into all of the problems that people now run into using it with other data sources. Another example is in state management and what happens if you have a large amount of data that you're pulling out of a data source, and then halfway through the whole story, some error is raised because like the connection broke down or whatever. Meltano currently is a little bit naive, and in that case, it just assumes that the entire pipeline failed, and then the next time you restart it, it will have to start from scratch, not where it actually left off in the middle of the failing run, but where the previous successful run left off. And this is the kind of feedback that in retrospect makes a lot of sense, but this is things, of course, that people running Meltano in production are running into pretty quickly, and that we are now fixing. And that is also in part why right now we are explicitly only targeting these experienced data engineers that are comfortable using open source kind of beta quality software, and that are willing to go through the effort of actually experiencing all the rough edges, filing the feedback, and helping us figure out how to go from there. While if at this point we were all ready to invest more on making Meltano more accessible to a less technical audience or a less experienced data engineering audience, they would just have a really bad experience and then drop off and then maybe not come back until however many months from now. And that's fine, of course, because we know that a lot of people who find us today will have to come back and then have a better experience if they actually want to use this. But the people we get the most value from using Meltano right now are those who are in it for a long run and who want to give us that feedback based on their past experiences. And I think that even 1 or 2 months from now, through a lot of that feedback having been addressed, both by me and by some of these community members who have actually started contributing, which of course is very appreciated. Even 1 or 2 months from now, Meltano will be in a much better place for this slightly less technical audience, because then these experienced data engineers will really have been able to get it up to par with some of these other runners that they might be running in production today, with of course some of the unique advantages that Meltano offers, like kind of the DevOps first nature of approaching your Meltano project as just another software engineering project, and neat things like being able to really easily containerize your project and ship it around as a single Docker image, which can be really easily deployed on what the orchestration setup might look like in production. So if you look at the website today, it is very technical on purpose. And if you look at the focus section of the documentation where it describes who our target audience is right now, you'll also see that intentionally right now, we are primarily focusing on these highly technical people. But then a few months from now, I can see that changing. And the nice thing is that, of course, over the last couple of weeks already, we've been seeing the audience change a little bit, where now more and more people people are actually interested in using the UI. So while a couple of weeks ago that wasn't the case, because these data engineer consultants are more likely to just use the CLI by itself and put it up on their orchestrator or their Kubernetes cluster or whatever they have. And now we're seeing the users actually start being interested again in using the UI to put together their project and manage their pipelines and see the status of their pipelines, which of course also means that I will be prioritizing more UI related features in the future. And fortunately, Applied Labs, one of these data engineering consultants that are actually planning to offer a tool built around Meltano to their customers, they are doing a lot of work on the UI as well, because they know that their customers are looking for a UI first experience. So they are actually white labeling Meltano and contributing changes back that of course everyone will benefit from. But it's really exciting to see that Meltano is already kind of starting to become a platform with people using it to build their own businesses on top of. Applied Labs, like I mentioned, specifically are building taps and targets for the financial services industry, in which they have a lot of customers. And these taps and targets, they might not open source them, which of course is unfortunate for the community, but that's their business. And still, at the same time, they're contributing back to Meltano, so everyone ends up better. Because they know that the data sources that they will be building taps and targets for are so niche that they can make good money just offering a really well fine-tuned experience to their end users with Meltano as the user interface and their own proprietary taps and targets. And at the same time, of course, everyone else benefits from those UI improvements as well. So it's been really exciting to see the direction in which the community is already kind of taking the development of Meltano. And the fact that we're becoming a platform, even at this early stage, is just really great. Another example of that is that a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, someone in the Meltano Slack workspace actually asked me if I could recommend someone else in the Meltano Slack workspace who might be able to help them build some taps and targets quicker, because they didn't have much experience with that yet. And then I recommended another user from the Slack workspace, and now they're in business. So even within the Meltano Slack workspace, like business is already starting to come up between its various community members, which is of course a really great sign for the future, in which building Meltano taps and targets specifically for use with Meltano might create business beyond what the Singer ecosystem or in community previously enabled. So it's been very exciting to see the community develop like this.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. I like those last two examples too. That's cool.
Yeah, cool. Any more questions from you 20 people in the room?
Hey, Dal, this is Chester.
Hey, Chester.
Are you seeing increasing interest in folks wanting to use Meltano for machine learning projects, or if so, like, how do you qualify folks who are interested?
Okay, yeah. So ultimately, Meltano, since it fits in the kind of the data integration and data transformation step of the data pipeline, it can be relevant to anyone who just wants to get data out of various places and then put them in a place where they can do something with the data. So that might be, simple dashboarding and analytics. It might be running SQL queries directly against the data. But machine learning, use cases are very much also kind of at the end of the story there. But whatever a company is actually doing with the data that they are getting into the warehouse, the people we are talking to today are primarily these data engineers responsible for getting the data in the data warehouse. And I don't have much visibility in what happens afterwards. I have heard like machine learning, I've heard it brought up a number of times in the Slack workspace. I know people are using it for that purpose, but ultimately it's a generic tool intentionally. And anyone who just wants to get their data in a place where they can do a little bit more with it than the current state, where it's just in all these disparate systems, can find a place in Meltano. There's no need for us at this point to specifically target either people using it for ML or people using it for more simple analytics, because ultimately the first step in the pipeline or the life cycle looks roughly the same either way. I imagine that once we are at a place where Meltano will be more accessible to slightly less technical users who are themselves more likely to be involved with the later stages of the pipeline and the life cycle rather than the very first one, which means I'm talking not about data engineers right now who need to be highly technical to set up Meltano, but those less technical users who will be able to just one-click install Meltano, put in their data sources and go. Once we start targeting those people, chances are are that we will want to figure out, okay, how do we specifically find people who are interested in ML, and what can we do to make Meltano more useful for them? What can we do for people who want to use it for data analytics, etc. But that is very much going to be, in nature of what happens next. Right now, we're getting the most valuable feedback from working really closely with these data engineers. And since they are at the very beginning of the life cycle, they also don't really have a reason to share with me what their colleagues are going to be using the data for at the end, because they have different tools, it's different people, different interests and priorities.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. All right, well, thank you so much for your time, everyone. I hope to give you another update like this in 6 weeks or so. And in the meantime, if you're curious what we're up to, please check out the Meltano website, the blog, and of course, the Slack workspace. Right now, we're using the Slack workspace activity numbers as kind of a heuristic for Meltano's success in general, because right now, like I said, we're looking explicitly for feedback from people, and then Slack workspace is one of the best places to get that feedback through. And in general, with open source projects like this, more so than Google Analytics tracking numbers on the website, people actually joining the workspace shows some amount of commitment to, I want to figure this out, and I'm going to go where the other users are, and I'm going to get their feedback. So yeah, if you join the Slack workspace, or if you get other people to join it who might be interested, that's kind of the way we're measuring right now how well we are resonating with the community. And then you can help out with that if you want to be part of that community too. So thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.